I'm Samuel Zwickel.
I'm Andrew Liang.
And we're roommates at Harvard. Andrew, hurry up!
Sam, get out of here!
Right now, we don't amount to much.
So we decided to see what interesting things other pairs of friends have done since leaving Cambridge.
Turns out some Crimson editors teamed up to help a president win re-election.
Other friends run multi-billion-dollar hedge funds together.
So join us as we chat with these people who are much cooler than we are.
And this is
Crimson Connections.
The problem with Harvard, I mean, you can pretend it's Hogwarts if you live in those houses. But if, like me and Jill, you walk into your room in Mather House the first day and there's pigeon shit, a concrete slab with pigeon shit all over the place because the pigeons had found an open window and they roosted in in our room in Mather House. Perhaps it was a harbinger of things to come.
We were a good nest.
We had to clean it up. We didn't have roaches, we had pigeons.
Yeah, so how'd you guys end up together in Mather House? Were you freshman year roommates or how'd you end up meeting?
We weren't, but Amy and I knew each other in high school. We went
to high school together. We were in the same class in high school. We knew each other pretty well. We had intersecting friendship groups.
But what we did is we applied in a sort of blocking group, Amy with one of her freshman year roommates and me with one of mine.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right.
Oh, that's fun.
Because I think we foolishly thought that if we were four, we had a better chance to go to Adam's house or someplace cool.
But no. Well, Mather House is now, I mean, I think of it as kind of cool because first of all, it was hard to live there. You know, it was very different. And
so far away. Too.
And it was wrong to live in Mather House at Harvard. But when you think of it now, looking back, it was architecturally interesting.
I think it's uniquely ugly. We should add a footnote that we were the first class of women to live in Harvard Yard. And I suppose, Amy, you did too, but I chose to live in the yard. I raised my hand.
Rather than at Courier. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, you wanted to be in the middle of everything. I think we were also the first class of women to be Harvard graduates and not Radcliffe graduates.
Would love to hear about your first impression of Harvard. Like what did you think when you walked in the yard and the quad?
I thought it was another place a little bit like my high school, and I wonder if Jill felt this way, where it was just this miracle place. It was a new kind of miracle place of, you know, it just seemed like really interesting people. It was so beautiful. The yard was so beautiful. And I had wanted to be there so badly that getting to be there seemed fabulous to me. And then I wondered, how can I mean something here? You know, because of its long tradition, because of what it was, because it was, to me anyway, I don't know also if Jill thought, it was a man's place in some ways.
That was my impression is I had never seen so many boys in one place ever.
Both good and bad. You know, that was both a good thing and a bad thing.
And
that was overwhelming.
The first night we were there, you know, it was, the chant, those stupid chants, Thayer sucks.
Yeah, and that was mine. Thayer was mine. So
right,
Thayer sucks. It does suck, but you know.
That was the game then.
And I thought it was so stupid because I wasn't a boy.
Stupid. Yeah, and I remember being very intimidated by where we ate is where my English department now is.
So, but even funnier is that my husband went to Harvard also several years after I did. So he's younger than I am. And he had to work off some of his debt. So he worked in something called the Pig. I doubt you still have the Pig, but the Pig was where everybody brought up their trays and Harvard students, my husband among them, took all the glop and junk and threw it into the Pig. And now the English department is in the Pig. That's what we discovered. So that I loved that, because the English
Uh-huh.
department used to be in a very refined building up off near.
They restored the building that used to be the Union. It's gorgeous now.
It is beautiful, yeah, but I don't know what it's called.
I remember being very uncomfortable and freaked out in what was the freshman union where we ate, because you'd fill your tray, and even if I was with my favorite roommate who then lived in our
With us.
quad, I still never you're standing there with your tray, and I never really knew a safe place to sit down.
I had this feeling of I had to be with someone to go there. I think Jill felt that way too. And finally, a
even
friend of
then-
mine from Thayer said to me, this is Joe Strauss, he said, I will pay you to go to the freshman union by yourself. I said,
It was pretty.
I said,
awful.
okay. He gave me a dime and I went by myself. But it was intimidating, as so many things were at Harvard for women, including the Crimson itself, which I realize now, looking back on it, was like all these men deciding whether you could be a men. I didn't think of them as men then. All these boys deciding whether you, a girl, could be on their august, you know, in their august pages and writing notes about you in that book, which I forget. I mean, I blocked out so much of the Crimson Comp because of, it wasn't humiliating to me, but it was like,
Scary.
it was scary and judgmental, and it made me feel bad. And I remember that very clearly.
homesick for the first half of freshman year, which really surprised me. Yeah, but I was really homesick and kind of freaked out for most of it. Although I loved the courses that I took. And I still remember the courses I took fall term of freshman year better than any others. It's strange.
No, it was a great school. You know, when I started to teach, I started to teach the way my teachers at Harvard had, like Walter Jackson Bate, who taught The Age of Johnson. It's really famous. And he would come out, this kind of old, slightly stooped man. He was probably my age. And he would come out and he would just read his damn notes for the biography he was writing of Samuel Johnson. And I thought he was a genius. He made us laugh because Johnson was funny. And then I tried to teach my classes at the University of California at Irvine the way Walter Jackson Bate had taught his classes. And the students were like, no, no, you have to talk to us. You have to engage with us. We're going to give you really bad evaluations if you try to be like Walter Jackson Bate. And I soon gave up the fight. Sorry, professor.
Now, you both, of course, have highly accomplished careers in journalism, and you both got your start with some endeavors on campus. So, Amy, I had a chance to look back into our archives, and I saw your name on a few of the pages. Would you mind sharing a bit about what that experience was like for you?
I know that on the internet for a really long time, if you looked up me or Jill, you found that we did makeup at Agassiz Theater at Radcliffe for the theater. That's all that there was about us. I would look up me, there I was with Jill. I would look up Jill, there she was. We had nothing else. So yeah, I worked on the Crimson, but I didn't really. I was really bad. So I wrote things for the comp and they put them in the paper, as they do. That's what the comp is all about, is getting free work, basically, with no promise of employment. And then once I got on the Crimson, I stopped writing for the Crimson because of that sort of male thing. So I only remember like a book review of a biography of a very illustrious congressman of his day. And otherwise, I don't really, Tip O'Neill it was, I don't really remember anything I wrote for them. I don't remember what I did, but I knew that I wanted to be a writer, kind of, but I didn't know what kind. Jill probably had a better idea.
Not at all. I didn't even comp for the Crimson. In fact, my only experience with the Crimson is a really awful one, but it's kind of funny, which is our senior year. You know, you probably still do a big graduation issue of the Crimson, which is left on all of the seats for the parents. And it's, you know, I think ours was like 2 sections. And a former boyfriend of Amy's was the president of the Crimson, and a really old friend of mine, someone that I had met in ninth grade, Nick Lemon. And he wanted to do, for the commencement issue, a profile of a male quad and a female quad from freshman year. And he chose my room and my 3 roommates to profile all of us. And I was very, naive about the ways of journalism. And I just blabbed to him about everything, including like sex and drugs.
I don't remember
And
this.
oh my God,
And then he published it.
He published it, and there are my poor parents, knowing that every other parent is reading about who I slept with and what drugs I took. It was bad. It was a real wake-up call.
And we've learned since then a few lessons, and one is that in this kind of situation with you guys, we don't tell any truths. We have a pact. The truths we tell are just skimming over the top of the whole situation, and that's all we ever give, right, Jill?
I started freshman year writing for the Harvard Independent because not paying that much attention, not knowing much about journalism, then it came to our dorms. It was on Thursdays. Do you remember that?
Yes.
And for some reason, I didn't really pay that much attention to the Crimson, but because the Independent had like what movies were going to be playing in the houses, the listings, I liked it. And I started reviewing. They assigned me to review every Tuesday night. I would go to the Black Box Theater, and it was all of these like experimental plays that I didn't really understand, but I remember mostly was actors shouting at me, like, that the play would be the actors shouting at the audience. And, I would do little reviews of those plays, and that's really the first journalism that I did. And I was just, to be honest, in all of that, I tried all kinds of crazy activities freshman year. I even took Tai Chi.
Oh my God. Well, at least you weren't a clown.
I was just
like
in this desperate, I was kind of in this desperate search to find something and meet people.
I think that's what freshmen do. I was in the chorus. I sang the Hallelujah chorus at Memorial Hall.
Even sophomore year, I was still in a desperate search for the right extracurricular. And so I tried out for the only play I was ever in. And it was a house production at Kirkland House of a Noel Coward play called Hay Fever. And hearing my weird pronunciation and voice, you can imagine how terrible I was in the role of an English flapper. A flapper,
I think you would be good.
I wasn't. And Henry, my husband, plays he can play anything on the piano by ear, and he played. He played I think Cole Porter tunes during. There were 2 intermissions, and that's how we met.
He was very, very cute. He still is very, very
He's still
cute.
pretty cute. Yeah.
I think so.
I had picked history and lit for my major.
Me too, but they wouldn't let me in. This is the story of my life at Harvard.
Oh,
So sad. They admitted Bobby Kennedy instead, or that's how I look at it. But maybe they admitted you instead. Now I can carry a grudge in public. Did you love history and lit?
I did. I really loved it, although it hasn't really, except for, reading Dickens and taking Shakespeare and Milton and all of that, which I'm really happy I did. My hist and lit was modern British.
I wanted American, and I think American is the hardest.
So, knowing like about the prime ministers, and William of Orange hasn't really come in that handy in my life.
We're curious, I think, especially, talking journalist to journalist, what kinds of writers, what kinds of works inspire you? Are there, essays or books you read as Hist and Lit concentrators that have been most inspiring moving forward?
My favorite writer is probably Charles Dickens, previously mentioned. He's still my favorite, even though I now look at him and I think, well, maybe your time has passed. Maybe no one cares about you anymore. Of course, I'm in an English department in the modern world, so I know that Dickens is mostly looked down on. But to me, he was someone who combined fiction and journalism in this wonderful way, because he was such a journalist with a journalist's eye and actually had been a court reporter. And so I love his work, and that's really important to me. But right now I'm again back in the throes of Philip Pullman. So you see that I may be a journalist, but I'm always like looking for the novelists. I look at novelists more than I do nonfiction writers. And maybe that's why I write my nonfiction like fiction.
Yeah.
Well, I think the best nonfiction should read like fiction.
Right, exactly.
Be that engaging and gripping, et cetera, et cetera. Freshman year, I discovered Bob Woodward because, Watergate was breaking, and I would go to the square and buy, days old Washington Posts for like $6. I think they were ridiculously expensive and very dated, but I wanted to read those stories. And, I remember studying for freshman year exams with the radio on, listening to the first Watergate hearings.
Yeah, Watergate was extremely powerful to us in terms of looking at journalism as something that could really move the world, move the nation anyway.
Yeah, if we went back and asked you in senior year what you wanted to do after college, what you were most looking forward to, what would you have said?
I would have said that, I wanted to be a journalist, so I applied to the Radcliffe Publishing course and they rejected me, and I applied to Columbia Journalism School and they rejected me. So I got from Harvard without really applying that I remember, I got a fellowship to the École Normale Supérieure for 1 year from Harvard Radcliffe. So I went to Paris, which in the end turned out to be better than anything I was trying to get. But I always like to tell people who ask me about my career as a journalist that I couldn't get into Columbia. I come from a long line of lawyers, and they all wanted me to be a lawyer. My brother was a doctor. My father was a little bit sad, although he was very proud of my brother. But so everyone wanted me to be a lawyer, the grandfathers, the fathers, the uncles. And I applied to Columbia Law School, but in a strange twist, Columbia Law School said,
admitted.
Yes, they said, you can come, incredibly. But they said, instead of me saying, well, I want to take a gap year, they said, we want you to take a gap year. I don't know. I still don't believe it in my mental mind, remembering this history, but they said that. And Boston University also admitted me to their law school. And my grandfather said, go to Boston. Don't wait for Columbia, because if you don't go now, you'll never go to law school. And I didn't go to Boston, and then I didn't go to Columbia. And I worked for a year as a paralegal. That was the best I could do in the law. It was very Dickensian. We wrote on long legal pads in handwriting. And then I went to The Nation magazine, and that sealed my fate.
So you were at The Nation. You didn't go to law school. What led you to Haiti?
Time magazine.
And Time magazine, yeah. What led you to Haiti, and what did you do in Haiti?
Well, the first thing that led me to Haiti was I lived in a neighborhood where there were a lot of Haitians up at Columbia University. There were lots and lots of Haitian refugees from the Duvalier regime. And they would collect on corners and speak their language that I could tell was French, but it wasn't French, it was Creole. And there were tons of their newspapers in the neighborhood. And they published just a gigantic number of newspapers for such a relatively small community. So I would read them, and they were in French, which I already spoke, as you know, because I had that thing to Paris. I was a French minor at Harvard.
Can I interject for a second?
You may, yes.
Amy was a spectacular French student in high school. You were.
I loved French. Yeah, I love
Fantastic.
languages. I love languages, and so I learned Creole. I got the tapes to learn it because it was really interesting, and I thought maybe I would go down to Haiti. And then the regime began to fall in Haiti, the Duvalier regime. So not Papa Doc, but Baby Doc, and the Americans were sort of on the side of maybe regime change in Haiti. And I thought, oh, I better get down, or I'll never see the Duvalier regime, which I was interested in because Graham Greene wrote his novel, The Comedians, about that regime. So I did get down like 5 days before it fell or something. And it was incredible. And I watched Baby Doc leave. And when you see, I mean, journalists will tell you this, your first posting to a foreign assignment is formative. And if you are lucky enough, the way I was, to see something dramatic and like the rise of democracy, so we thought at the time, it changes your life forever.
I knew I wanted to get out of the Northeast. We lived in New York and then went to Harvard, and it was kind of like enough already. And I got, mainly I think because of the Carter campaign, I got super interested in the American South my senior year. I took some courses related. I knew, the one thing I knew is I wanted to go and live in the South, and I applied for some newspaper jobs, and the Charlotte Observer was willing to give me a tryout to cover intramural high school sports.
Ooh, that's painful.
And I went down to Charlotte and got lost on my way to a high school to cover a swim meet, and sports wasn't really my thing anyway, so I don't think, they weren't too interested in me, and I didn't feel like that was a good fit. So I worked on a political campaign in Virginia. That was my first job. I worked for a old school Democratic liberal populist, so it was great. And then I kind of spent, they were sort of my vagabond years. I spent my first 2.5 years out of Harvard. Like, I went from working on a campaign in Virginia to living in Columbia, South Carolina, where...
Didn't you have a Southern boyfriend by then, Jill?
No, I had Henry.
You had Henry.
I had the same...
Henry, who just seems like he's a Southern gentleman, but is not.
And I lived in South Carolina and worked on Democratic campaigns, including Bill Clinton's first gubernatorial race. So I met Bill and Hillary way back in 1978. And I got my first real journalism job because of a friend, Amy, knew him too, John Ellis, who was working.
Of course, I'm still in touch.
He worked in the NBC News election unit, and they were looking for a Southern states expert. And he called me up and said, like, would you be up for coming back to New York and doing this job? And I beelined back. When I lived in South Carolina, that's when I first started doing political writing, and I had a great assignment. Believe it or not, there was an alternative weekly newspaper in Columbia, South Carolina that was pretty good and pretty lefty, and they assigned me to cover Strom Thurman, who was running for re-election to the Senate. And so I wrote a weekly story about South Carolina politics, focusing mainly on him. And Lee Atwater and I got to know each other real well. And he continued until he died to be a good source of mine, and someone who, when I was a journalist in Washington, I would see socially sometimes, and he was my gateway into Republican politics. He worked he was a big Republican strategist who sort of was the political brains for Ronald Reagan and the first George Bush. And he knew how to play the race card in a pretty odious way because he'd learned politics at the knee of the person who designed President Nixon's Southern strategy, which is when the South went from being Democratic to Republican. And
so here's this guy who's infamous, and so how did you get him as a source?
Because he was Strom Thurman's campaign manager, and I was, Strom Thurman really didn't want press attention because he was already pretty ancient in 1978. And so his mode of campaigning was mainly going around the state in a Winnebago, a camper, and I would follow along, and Lee would be with him. And when you're covering political campaigns, you have to kill a lot of time. And so we just, would talk, and he was very funny, evil, but funny. So he was pretty easy for me to connect with. I would say, the biggest challenge of my career was not 9/11 when I was Washington bureau chief. Just the sheer number of stories, and my house was near the Pentagon, which was hit, and it was just a lot of pressure, but everyone who worked for me kind of was at their best, performed their best. And
is there something that you would tell people who are considering journalism today about the profession, how it's different now than when you went in, and sort of where you see it being taken by the next guard in essence?
I'll say my amateur thing, and then Jill can tell you more knowledgeably what she thinks because she knows a lot. Obviously it's going to be digital. It's going to be more immediate. It already is more immediate. I'm writing a thing about Trump and COVID right now that really should be up right now. I shouldn't even be talking to you because, and you can say today, and it means actually today when you write it, because your piece goes up today. That's weird to us because we're used to it. At least it was yesterday. It never was today that you could write today, comma, blah, blah. No, if you were a TV journalist, yes, but not if you were a print journalist. So that's a thing, that it's the immediacy that's so amazing. And my son's a journalist now. He's at the Daily News in New York. And we worry because we think the profession is in decline. Certainly print newspapers are in decline, but I just have to believe, and I tell my students this all the time, that it will go on because there's obviously a desperate need for it. Trump has shown nothing so much as how desperate the need is for real journalism. And a lot of the media have risen to that occasion, I think. And that's been fun to watch. And I truly believe in journalism as, the most important check on government when it's good.
it's why the First Amendment is first.
Exactly.
Seriously.
If anyone knows how many newspapers there were in America at the beginning of the state.
A great story is a human need, and I'm pretty optimistic about the profession. I mean, and I'm optimistic about long form storytelling and enterprise journalism and investigative journalism, which is what I love the most. And look at podcasts. The best ones, like Slow Burn, are this cool combination of history and storytelling, and very inventive in splitting a story into 6 parts, 8 parts, just not that different from the series that I edited and helped put together at the Times. And
Right.
Everyone says, everything has to be short and, like social media. And, it's not true. And the most read pieces, in the Times now are often, the longer,
Right.
more challenging, Trump's taxes, et cetera, et cetera. And, where things have completely gone to dust is local and regional newspapers. Like the Charlotte Observer, when I told you the story about intramural sports coverage being potentially my start, that used to be a great newspaper.
Right. It was famous.
Great quality paper. And, it's a shadow of its former self. And there is no financial model that is going to
That has worked so far.
save those papers. And newspapers still break by far the majority of the important stories.